Did Bob and Karen Downes let their children sleep with predators? Did social services fail the children consistently? And could Charlene's parents have been responsible for her death? Welcome to Vanished Voices UK, your new favourite spot for curious missing persons cases, true crime stories, and in-depth investigations. Please be aware that this video contains themes that may be unsuitable for some viewers. While not graphically described, some of the discussions in this video include sexual abuse, exploitation, and grooming. If you or anyone you know is at risk or is a victim of any of these crimes, please contact the police urgently or contact Childline or the NSPCC for support and advice. Home truths. Inside the Downes household. Before Charlene Downes ever set foot in Blackpool's town centre alleyways or takeaway shops, the greatest threats may have lurked within her own home. In this second video, we peel back the curtain on 109 Buchanan Street, examining confidential social services files, examining who walked through the Downes front door, and exploring how a childhood shadowed by neglect and risky adults shaped Charlene's fate. Official records show that in 1998 to 99, while the family still lived in Walsall, social workers threatened care proceedings after discovering their children left unsupervised with known sex offenders. Those files, leaked to the press in 2011, detail a revolving door of adult male lodgers, some later convicted of indecent assault or rape. Blackpool's Children's Services and Lancashire Police have declined to confirm or deny the authenticity of these reports, citing confidentiality and data protection rules. In the coming investigation, we'll look at those closest to the case, Charlene's siblings, the parents, and comments from the community. Understanding Charlene's home life is key to answering the question, how did a child so vulnerable slip through every safety net, and why was nothing done to save her? In 2011, excerpts from confidential social services files first surfaced, and parts of those reports were later discussed in the Times newspaper. These reports painted a troubling portrait of the Downes household long before Charlene's disappearance. From neglect to domestic violence to allowing their children to sleep with adults, these reports cover a wide range of disgusting allegations against not only Bob and Karen Downes, but many other people who had access to these four youngsters. The following is taken from these leaked reports. I've tried to put them into chronological order as much as possible, but some pages have no dates. In 1993, Charlene's sister Emma had gone to live with her grandfather and grandfather's second wife. This seems like it could have been a way to get away from the dreadful conditions of her home. At some point, she was taken to the doctor due to nightmares she was having, and subsequently explained to the doctor that she'd been touched inappropriately by her mum and Lena, her granddad's wife. Emma then went to live with a foster family and made strange statements about missing an uncle. Emma also made further claims that a family friend had sexually abused her. The Brock family are discussed in the report, and I will tentatively assume that this is her grandfather and his wife. The report states that Emma is not allowed to stay there due to a known sex offender living in the home as a lodger. This man's identity is redacted, but it also states that he had been convicted of rape. In another part of the report, the Brock family also state that Bob was violent towards Karen. In 1997, Emma makes further allegations of sexual assault by a family friend. However, the police seem unable to substantiate this claim. Whether or not they looked into it properly is another story. In 1998, Emma and Charlene accused a man of sexual abuse. His name is also redacted in this document. Allegedly, Bob and Karen had allowed this man to walk them to school. However, the girls alleged that he was actually sexually assaulting them and having sex with Emma. It is also alleged that they allowed Emma to have a sexual relationship with an adult man at the age of 9. The report suggests that this man was 19 years old. Willful neglect proceedings were mooted in 1998 to 1999 when the family lived in Walsall. Social workers recorded that the children were routinely left unsupervised with adult male lodgers, some of whom carried prior convictions for indecent assault and rape. In another very alarming entry, an environmental health officer who called unannounced into the Downes household to inspect issues with the home reported that he found 12-year-old Charlene alone in bed with a much older male visitor. When the EHO officer entered the room, he stated that Charlene was wearing some kind of negligee and that she quickly stood up and grabbed some money off the bed. He also saw the male doing his zip up. When he questioned Charlene as to whether she was okay, she said that the male was her uncle and that everything was okay. It is suspected by some that Charlene's parents were facilitating her and her siblings to be repeatedly sexually abused in exchange for money. One example of behaviour that seems to support this theory is that when the EHO officer left the room, he came across Bob in the hallway. He questioned him, and Bob was dismissive of the situation, while the old man found with Charlene left the house. The EHO officer reported this incident to social services. What became of that is unclear, but they had concerns about many men who had been allowed into the property, and some who had even stayed over. 16 men are named on the report, including Monroe, who we looked at in part 1 of this series, and who was found guilty of multiple sex crimes against children. It is also alleged that all of the other 15 men had convictions for either sexual or violent crimes. Bob has alleged since that he didn't know Monroe was a child predator, and that he believed he'd been accused of sexually assaulting his ex-girlfriend. Another part of this report states that Charlene and Karen had an argument over Charlene telling her mum that she gets money for looking after a man's bike, and that she can get money whenever she wants it. Karen later discussed this in an interview and suggested that she was worried about where the money was coming from. It is also alleged that the main reason for the family moving to Blackpool is that the social services in Walsall were planning on taking action against Charlene's parents for the multitude of neglectful and abusive behaviours. The move effectively halted formal action. The report also states that Robert moved out of the house at one point to appease social services, and that Charlene and Robert Jr. were placed in foster care while the family moved home. Frustratingly, because these files are bound by strict confidentiality under data protection and child protection law, neither Lancashire Police nor Blackpool Children's Services will confirm or deny that they are authentic. However, there are many indications that they are legitimate. The footers contain personal information and codes that are likely case numbers. The fact that the Times newspaper reported on these documents is also a good sign that they are real, as they are a reliable news outlet. It is not just the social service records that have been leaked. Among these leaks is a letter sent to the police about Robert Downes Sr. This letter is from an ex-manager of a caravan park that he had been working at as a security guard. This letter explains that he had been asked to leave his job due to indecent behaviour towards young girls. This behaviour included grabbing multiple young women and generally being unprofessional and creepy. He had been warned numerous times about this behaviour, but continued to do it. This letter could be unreliable for many reasons, but if legitimate, it further points to an individual who showed serious signs of inappropriate behaviour. These documents all show a persistent pattern of neglect and disturbing behaviour that left Charlene and her siblings dangerously exposed. What exactly were social services waiting for? If these documents are legitimate, the children were clearly in an absolutely horrific, abusive environment. In exploring the Downes household, You might expect Charlene's siblings to have spoken out, yet across all reputable reporting, no public statement from Charlene's own brother or sisters accuses their parents of direct abuse or exploitation of Charlene or any siblings, apart from those contained in the social services leaks. Rebecca Downes, Charlene's sister, who was with her that afternoon before she went missing, has never spoken in the media about parental wrongdoing. Emma Downes, Charlene's other sister, likewise has made no allegation against Karen or Bob Downes. On certain platforms, there are second-hand rumours claiming the sisters privately accused their parents of pimping out the children. These are speculative and based on unverified chatter. Karen Downes suggested that Charlene had a hidden lifestyle, and as mentioned briefly before, she goes on to say, "She once came home with £70 and we couldn't get the truth out of her. We didn't know where it had come from, and she had cigarettes too. We didn't know who was buying them for her." The lack of comments made by Charlene's siblings seem to go against the legitimacy of the leaked documents, but it is important to remember that there may be many reasons why they have not spoken out. For example, these may include shame, fear, or altered recollections due to trauma. Beyond the walls of 109 Buchanan Street, the Downes family became a focal point for the community's anger, grief, and in some cases intolerance. In a 2017 Vice News feature, local residents described the town as divided by race and class, with one cafe owner lamenting, "It's not just about Charlene. People here think the family had a hand in it. Rumours fly in pubs and on the promenade. It's like everyone has an opinion, but no one has the facts." Certain columns in the Blackpool Gazette seem to echo this feeling. "We've lost all faith," wrote one reader in 2023. 20 years on, we're still waiting. People here think that Karen and Bob aren't telling the whole truth. On local Facebook groups, parents voiced fear for their own children. "If it can happen to Charlene, it can happen to any of ours," wrote a mother of two in 2021. These posts, though sincere, often spun into unverified claims. For example, allegations that social workers warn neighbours not to trust the family. Reddit threads on unresolved mysteries frequently revisit the case, with one commenter in 2024 noting, "I grew up around there. Everyone knew someone who saw something, but nobody spoke up." These voices paint a portrait of a town still haunted, not only by Charlene's disappearance, but by the whispers and suspicions that have shadowed her family for over 2 decades.
Charlene, when I die and I go to heaven, I'll be waiting at the golden gates for you. And if you're not there by Judgment Day, then I know you've gone the opposite way. So to prove my love for you, my darling, I'm prepared to go through hell for you. All my love, sweetheart. Good night. God bless.
Life inside 109 Buchanan Street was clearly far from stable. In the months after the 2008 retrial collapse discussed in the first part, family tensions erupted into violence, another layer of turmoil around Charlene's disappearance. In April 2008, just days after the Crown Prosecution Service offered no evidence at the retrial, Karen Downes stabbed her husband, Bob. This was during an argument at home. The wounds were minor, and Bob declined to press charges, attributing the outburst to the stress and grief of their missing daughter. A year later, in March 2009, their daughter Emma Downes appeared at Preston Crown Court, accused of racially aggravated common assault against the brother of one of Charlene's original suspects. The prosecution accepted her plea to common assault, and she was sentenced to community service. A stark reminder of how the Downes name had become intertwined with local conflict and resentment. In 2012, Charlene's younger brother admitted to punching the same man. He received a fine and suspended sentence, signalling that the family's pain often spilled onto the streets of Blackpool itself. These incidents, documented in court records and news reports, underscore a household under immense strain. The assaults by Charlene's siblings seem to suggest that they strongly believe that the accused men were responsible for Charlene's death. If they believe this, does this make it less likely that Bob and/or Karen were involved in her death, despite the alleged abuse that they dished out on their children? The Downes family tragedy did not end with Charlene's disappearance. In December 2021, Charlene's brother Robert Downes Jr., aged 30, was found unresponsive in the family home and later pronounced dead. An inquest in July 2022 ruled his death an accidental heroin overdose, a conclusion his mother described as the worst possible outcome for a son, haunted by his sister's fate. Karen Downes told the court that Robert had battled addiction for years, struggling with guilt, grief, and a sense that his family could never heal without answers. In her words, she said, "He never got over Charlene. He carried that pain with him always." Landmark studies into addiction and mental health established that individuals who endure 4 or more adverse childhood experiences such as neglect, household dysfunction, or seeing a caregiver become a victim of violence are 7 to 10 times more likely to develop substance use disorders later in life. Further research in the UK echoes this finding. A Public Health England review in 2020 found that children with multiple ACEs are at significantly higher risk of mental health problems, self-harm, and addiction as adolescents or adults. For the Downes children, the leaked Walsall and Blackpool Social Services reports document repeated neglect, leaving them alone with known sex offenders, domestic violence accusations, and sexual abuse. For Robert Downes Jr., the combination of early neglect, the chaotic home environment, and the unresolved trauma of Charlene's disappearance likely created a perfect storm for addiction to take hold. While much of our focus rests on the Downes household, it's critical to situate their experience within broader systemic failures in child protection. Operation Augusta was launched in February 2004 by Greater Manchester Police and Social Services in South Manchester after the death of 15-year-old Victoria Agoglia. She'd reported being raped by adults that she met in care. Initial scoping uncovered 25 potential victims aged 11 to 17 and 97 persons of interest, largely restaurant workers, operating grooming networks around local care homes. By July 2005, the investigation had identified at least 57 child victims, but secured only 3 convictions before resources were withdrawn, leaving dozens of perpetrators unprosecuted. Closer to home, Blackpool's Children's Services came under statutory direction in July 2019 after an Ofsted Commissioner's report deemed their overall effectiveness inadequate. Inspectors found inconsistent safeguarding practice, poor record keeping, and high staff turnover, echoes of the neglect first flagged in Charlene's early life. In a 2023 inspection, this rating went up from inadequate to requires improvement. For services dealing with the most vulnerable and at-risk people in the country, these ratings are quite scary. Finally, multi-agency safeguarding reforms from local safeguarding children partnerships to multi-agency safeguarding hubs now aim to bridge the gap between police, social services, and health, ensuring that warnings like those in the leaked Downes report cannot be ignored. For as long as I can remember, the state of social services has been extremely poor. Government institutions always seem to have money for more studies and to implement new nicely named policies, but how much have things improved in the last 20 years? Well, social care in the UK is much larger, far more crisis-driven, and less prevention-focused than it was in the mid-2000s. The early drive to keep children safe through family support has been undermined by funding cuts. While recent reforms offer hope, structural weaknesses, regional inequality, workforce strain, and fragmented service models continue to limit progress. We've traced the Downes family journey, from Walsall neglect warnings to the tragedy that unfolded on Buchanan Street. Leaked social services files revealed repeated failures to protect Charlene and her siblings from known sex offenders in their own home. We've seen how domestic violence, community suspicion, and unaddressed trauma compounded a childhood of adversity. For now, we can only make up our own minds as to the legitimacy of these released documents. What do you think? Do you think her parents had anything to do with her death? Let me know in the comments below. These adverse childhood experiences, neglect, exposure to violence, and household dysfunction carry lifelong consequences. In the Downes case, the devastating toll seems clear. Charlene's home should have been her sanctuary. Instead, it became the first link in a chain of neglect. If we are to honour her memory, and the memory of every child failed by the system, we must demand better. This ends our deep dive into Charlene's home life. Thank you for watching. Please share this video, support local and national child protection charities, and join us in calling for the reforms that could save lives before another childhood goes unprotected. As always, thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, every missing person deserves to be found. Like, comment, and subscribe to see more new and cold missing persons cases from the UK.